Now, only about 1% of reported rapes get as far as a conviction in court, which is why we say now that rape has practically been criminalised. Because, if you're a man that's raped his wife and you get convicted, you're not going to feel guilty, you're just going to feel unlucky.
Welcome, ladies. Thank you very much for joining me today to this new episode of Domination State dedicated to this sensitive subject that is rape and the domination of women. So you all work for this, have been working for this organization, Women Against Rape, for a long time. So you have a lot of experience, and I'm very happy to have you here. Thank you so much.
Thank you. We're really glad to join you.
So your organization was founded in 1976 in the UK. Can you provide some context of why it was created at that specific time, at that specific place?
Yes. What happened was that in the 70s, there was a new growth in the women's movement, a real outburst of activity, discussion, getting together, and just women comparing experiences of all kinds. And a lot of women began to talk about relationships with men, and a lot of women obviously were already involved in the queer movement and other kinds of movements, anti-racist movement, etc., which were very active, in the 70s and obviously coming out of the 60s. And women were discussing in their relationships with men really how common it was, finding out from each other how common it was that they were experiencing violence in their relationship, whether it was domestic violence or which they used to call battered women, or rape. And comparing their sex lives, comparing all kinds of things, how they got on with their kids, etc. And I think before then it was very much a taboo and people hardly talked about it. And it was that same decade, I think, when the refuge movement was set up, which was another turning point. But in the 70s, really, it was very common for mass demonstrations of women in the street. And we were part of that, a group of women actually who knew of us or knew of the Wages for Housework campaign, which had been set up in 1972, that founded our Women's Centre, came to that campaign and said, you guys seem to know what you're doing with organising. We'd like to set up a group. Can you help us? And that's how Women Against Rape was founded. There were demonstrations outside the courts, which we were part of. There were a lot of internal meetings, working out what do we stand for, what are our aims, what are we trying to do. And a really pressing issue for Women Against Rape in those early days was rape within marriage, rape from husbands and other violence from husbands. At that time, it wasn't against the law, which many people are shocked by because, most people, I think, in Britain assume that this all changed in the 17 or 1800s. But actually, at that point, it was not against the law because it was explicitly excluded in the rape law that if it was your husband, it wasn't rape. And it was a very fundamental piece of what we set out to do. We campaigned on to get rape in marriage recognised in the law for 15 years, and it took us until 1991 to win that. And it was a very, very active campaign. We did many, many things, which I won't go into here because we haven't got the time. But other things we were working on, our key demands have also been widely accepted or have now become part of the law. If I can just give you a couple of examples, that the state should recognise all forms of rape against women and children by husbands, fathers, family members, as well as by strangers. including the abusive authority, such as assaults by police, by priests, by doctors, anyone else in authority, social workers, people who run children's homes. And crucially, that women need financial independence from men to be able to escape violence. And that all institutions of the state need to protect women and children from rape and not accuse us of lying. That is still an issue, that last point, because the state institutions, as we'll hear, in the interview today, don't protect women and children from rape and do accuse us of lying. We also demanded that all women have a right to say no to any unwanted sexual contact, even though our name is Women Against Rape. We deal with all kinds of violence, and whoever we are never to blame for the violence that we suffer. And in our early years, women really spoke out a lot from our own experience about the violence that we suffer. Spoke from the heart and really just spelled out what was happening. And that felt very revolutionary at the time, because it just wasn't commonplace. Although there were these massive demonstrations and banners and everything, it was a breakthrough for women to be able to speak. And many of the women who were involved in our organization, or, in the early days, were mostly grassroots women, not professionals, not women with power, but women from different races and nationalities, lesbian women, immigrants and refugees, and sex workers. And you can really see the presence of those different sectors in the early materials and the demands that came out from our organization. We said that individual men rape, and they should be prosecuted like any other crime. This is a serious crime, and we expect it to be taken seriously by the state. But at the same time, the state is responsible for setting us up for rape, for example, by keeping us poor and by cutting off our escape routes, and that they then let off the men rather than prosecute them or hold them to account in any other ways. So we were demanding justice from the police and the courts. We were demanding that we are treated with respect when we try and get help, and that we also are entitled to asylum and compensation. And we strongly disagreed with feminists all the way through our history, who have argued that women's main enemy is the man next door. There was actually a booklet printed which was called "The Enemy is the Man Next Door." We felt that really let the state off the hook and has nothing to say about the police. It's anti-men, it's anti-working class, and frankly, it's racist. And that was not at all a position that we wanted to be associated with or support in any way.
If you focus in these issues on individuals, you completely eliminate from debate the fact that it is a structure, it is a whole structure, and the state is certainly the puppeteer, if I may say, the puppet master of this whole structure. And indeed, it puts everything in the way of women to first already, maybe it took so much time for women, like you said, to just talk between themselves on these issues, to realize that it is not something that they were living at an individual level, that they were maybe unlucky or what. It was something really structural in the whole society. It just shows how all these women have internalized the fact that we live in a democracy, we have rights, we have equality, and if I'm living something terrible, it must be because I'm unlucky, or maybe it's my own fault. So yeah, unfortunately, it's so easy to derail the debate from the big picture to individual cases, and it's really damaging. Can you just elaborate a little bit, Lisa, on the refuge movement?
Well, it was very clear that there was an urgent need for women to be able to flee violent men. And I think one of the things, just the context that we're talking about, there were women, a lot of women were financially dependent on their husbands at that time. It wasn't as common for women to have independent incomes. And certainly, although many working class women have always had work outside the home, it was very low paid. It was factory work, it was cleaning kind of work, it was menial jobs, really, and very poorly paid jobs. And so women, there were many more women who were full-time housewives who were raising kids, and that was their full-time job. And still the pay differential between women and husbands was massive. And a lot of men didn't share the money. Women used to come to the Women's Centre in the 70s and say, I've got to go and ask permission for money for a hairdo, a haircut. I've got to, ask weekly permission to get packet cigarettes, etc. It was really like you were your husband's, he was your keeper, if you know what I mean. He controlled the purse strings, and you weren't even entitled at that point to ask how much he earned. I mean, it was quite common that women didn't know exactly what their husbands were earning, and many didn't even have a bank account. So in that situation, you are very vulnerable to violence and coercion, and a lot of fights went on over sex. And if women fought back, they often got beaten really badly, as well as raped. And so, there was a need to set up somewhere where women could flee to, hence the refuge movement. And it was part and parcel of the rest of the stuff that women were doing, where it was clear they just had to get away from this man and possibly all men to recover. We started in 1976, and we're a grassroots multiracial women's organisation based at the Crossroads Women's Centre with a number of other groups. And we provide rights information and support and advocacy. And we take up individual cases on the basis of what we call self-help, which means that the woman herself brings her case to us, and it's not that we're taking it off her like a lawyer would and doing it on her behalf, but that we work with her, first of all, to establish what's happened, because not everybody can put those pieces together, and then to find out where they are at, if they are going through the legal process or some other process where they've been engaging with the state. People get very confused about what their rights are, get treated very badly, and then you have to unravel what's happened and help them work out what they can do at the point they're at. And so that applies to all the different cases we're working on, whether it's rape or domestic abuse or asylum cases or compensation cases, all the cases that we do. And we consult together, regularly to make sure that we have all the pieces in mind that we need, all the information we need, and all the different sectors that we're working as together. And we also use what we're learning from that daily casework to make our campaigns. Those form the basis of our campaigns, because if you see a pattern or you see a gross injustice, it's very demoralizing to just move on to the next one and then the next one, because there's always thousands more behind them. And the only way that we feel we can make a difference is to inform our campaigns with this kind of daily injustice that we're encountering and challenging. And we are often going up against the authorities, with the women we're working with. When we say we advocate for them, that often means contacting the authorities in writing or verbally or in person and saying, look, these are her rights. Why isn't she getting them?
I'm reading a book at the moment on the wider issues of that women meet in the UK particularly. And one statistic really shocked me, which is that in 1980, I think the rate of conviction in rape cases was, I think, 1 in 3, something like that. And in 2020, it's 1 in 65. So yeah, this is I think will shock anybody, really, meaning things are getting worse, not better. Can you elaborate a little bit?
Well, things did get better for a while, partly as a result of all our campaigning, but now they've definitely slipped back again.
Right.
That goes nicely into another question, doesn't it, about what we're up against now?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're up against lots of barriers, and can you explain a little bit? I mean, the fact that you have, I mean, women are meeting barriers and problems and issues and violence at home and at work, and with the police when they go seek protection and maybe some form of justice, and within also the justice system. So can you explain a little bit how that makes your work difficult and how we try to deal with all these barriers?
Yeah, so like Lisa said, things got quite better thanks to the fact that there was so much campaigning, and women were out there getting these issues out and making them a priority. But now we found that we're up against bias everywhere. So as soon as you report to the police or to the authorities, it's a battle. From that moment on, you have to fight for everything where you shouldn't have to. And we do have victories, but like you said now, 1 in 3 rapes ended in conviction. And then you said, in 2020, it was 1 in 65. Well, now only about 1% of reported rapes get as far as a conviction in court, which is why we say now that rape has practically been decriminalised. Because, if you're a man that's raped his wife and you get convicted, you're not going to feel guilty. You're just going to feel unlucky because you're one of those unlucky ones that actually got caught. And we find from our own experiences and the women that have come to us that you've got from the very beginning, you've got reporting to the police, and that can be, depending on who you get, can start how the investigation is going to go. So we have read the standard operating procedures for how the police are supposed to investigate rape, and they're actually, on the whole, they're very good. A lot of it's redacted because obviously you don't want rapists going online and seeing how the police investigate what you've done. But the information that's out there, it's good. But one of the big problems is that there's so much bias from the police, the Crown Prosecution Service, the organisation that decides whether or not the case will go to court, and then in the criminal courts themselves. So, you can start off with automatically you're disbelieved. And just recently, one of the top chief of police said that the police shouldn't automatically start off believing a rape victim. Have to keep an open mind. But you've got these top police officers that are filtering down saying, well, let's start off from this might be a false allegation. So you've got the police automatically thinking, is she lying? Is she just bitter? Is she revengeful? Is she mentally ill? Is she a fantasist? So you've got the police automatically not believing you. Even when they do believe you, their investigations are structured round, okay, so what evidence is there to prove that the woman's not a credible witness or might be lying? It's not focused on, okay, so what evidence can we gather to back up what the woman's saying? And there's this myth that, well, rape is a very, very hard crime to prosecute because often there's no evidence. But often there's a lot of evidence. It might not be in witness accounts, but, it could be if the woman's reported to her GP or a friend or a counsellor, if she's been to one of the sexual assault referral centres where you can go and have a medical examination. And then if you want to report to the police, they've got that evidence there. Sometimes there's CCTV that might back up what a woman's saying beforehand, which might be that she was so drunk she couldn't consent. And very rarely do the police do a thorough, proper investigation where they gather all the evidence that's supporting you. If you're lucky enough to be one of the few people that does get a good police force dealing with your rape or a good set of police officers, then they have to take it to the Crown Prosecution Service, and they're the body that decide if it goes to court. They're made up of lawyers. And quite often they use the most outrageous rape myths that they shouldn't be using even now to decide whether or not the case is closed. So we've worked with a number of women who were abused as children, or their children have been abused themselves or raped by either a family member or a family friend. And the CPS, again, they're like the police. Straight away, they will look for, well, what are the chances of this woman lying or not being a good witness on the stand? Will the jury believe her? And they use rape myths such as, one woman was raped when she was a child and she couldn't remember the exact age it started. So she told, in the initial interview, she said she thought it was 11. And then in another interview, she said, well, I remember things happening from the age of 13. And the CPS used that as a reason to close the case, because they said she's not a credible witness. She's unreliable. She can't even remember the date. And we all know now, we know a lot more about trauma and how it affects, your memory and how you give your evidence. So you're up against institutional bias, and you're up against police officers a lot of the time that are very skeptical and do sloppy investigations. More recently, you probably will have heard about, our phones being taken from us. So, again, the police might say, well, we're looking for evidence that the crime happened, but that's not true. They're looking for evidence to discredit us, because what have messages that we've sent to friends, well, how does that bear any relation on what we're reporting when we're raped? It doesn't. So, it's like that they're trying to make it harder for us to report. So I do think that it's to put most of us off. I really do. Because if you had a police force that genuinely cared about the safety of women and the safety of women and children, they would be prioritising rape over things like car crime, which they haven't in the past. So, it's a really big problem. Another big problem is here in the UK is quite a lot of us that will report will then either be prosecuted ourselves for a lower level crime, e.g. harassment or criminal damage. But some of us have actually been prosecuted for so-called false rape allegation, which is where the police then turn on you, and instead of treating you as the victim, they treat you as the suspect. So we've worked with several women who have been accused of a false rape allegation, have been put on trial and have been convicted in some cases. I know that there was a study done. There were an awful lot of women being prosecuted for making a false rape allegation out of all of the women that had reported rape. And we've had a really successful campaign, that has really got the issue out there of stop prosecuting. Prosecute rapists, not rape victims. That was one of our chants that we used to have. Because when the conviction rate for rape is so low, why on earth would we deter even more women from coming forward and reporting? It's not going to do anything to keep us safe and to protect us and our children. So, the things that we need are the police to take us seriously, to look for evidence that supports us, not discredits us. We need the CPS to do exactly the same thing. One thing I have missed out, I know you mentioned the courts as well. And, we've sat through trials from women that we've supported where, even her own side, there's all this, there's this whole thing about court, and you picture in a rape trial, the defense barrister really going for you and, bringing up your sexual history, which they're not supposed to do, but they still manage to get that in through the back door. You've got this image of this horrific, horrible defense lawyer that's going to tear you apart. Quite often it's your own side that do that very subtly through the back door by not using the evidence that the police have given them. We were in one case where the key piece of evidence wasn't even put on a list for all sides to see that would be introduced into the trial. And when it was introduced into the trial, it was too late. And the judge said to the prosecutor, it should have been a key piece of evidence. This should have been evidence number one on your list of disclosed evidence, but it's too late to bring it in now. That guy got acquitted of everything. So you see the prosecution doing sometimes a really bad job of supporting the woman and prosecuting the rapist. And, you can get judges. I mean, even when sometimes rapists are found guilty, there was a case several years ago now where the victim was a young girl, and when upon sentencing the guy, the judge said that this girl was no angel. So how can you say that a girl under the age of 16, where that's classed as rape anyway in most circumstances, has kind of brought it on herself by not being an angelic child? So, it has gone backwards a lot. There are a lot of issues. We always say to women, look, if you know your rights and you've got an organisation behind you, then, you're more likely to get justice, or, we can support you all the way and you're more likely to be taken seriously. But most people don't know their rights. Most women don't know, you know, when you report to the police, sometimes you think, okay, well, this has been taken out of my hands. It's in their hands. I trust them to do what they're meant to do. And then by the time it's all gone pear-shaped, by the time it's all gone wrong, and you know, the case has been closed or the CPS have closed it and it doesn't get to court, you can sometimes be out of time to take any action. We're lucky some women have approached us and they've been in the time limit, and we've been able to say to them, look, we have a self-help guide, and this guide we have all written based on our own experiences, and it goes through your rights and what you can do to challenge them when things go wrong. And that's a really vital tool, I think, because, you know, I'm not going to discredit the role of counselling when you've been through a trauma, but as Chris has often said, and Lisa, of course, justice is a great healer. And when you don't get justice, you know, you're left in limbo, but also raging about the fact that you've been through a really terrible ordeal and the state just acts like it's nothing. You know, I said earlier, when they prioritised car crime over rape, that was happening in a Sapphire unit, which we can say a little bit more about later. But, you know, when rape isn't prioritised, that leaves you feeling very angry. And for some women, they never get over that trauma, do they? I'll just say very quickly, because I know we're going to say a little bit more about the family court as well. In the family court, you know, women, mothers and children, I think, are treated even worse than in the criminal courts, but we can go through that a bit later. Their domestic violence and their rape is completely dismissed in most cases, and their safety is not prioritised over the violent father's right to see their child. One of the biggest things as well is that we don't have the resources to leave violent situations. The majority of women are raped by somebody that they know. And often that's somebody that you're living with. And, you know, we don't have any money for ourselves where we can say, right, okay, I'm actually not dependent on this man. I don't have to put up with this violence. I can leave. We don't have that. And that, of course, leaves us more vulnerable to being, you know, routinely raped, abused, and exploited. So that's why we're supporting the demand by the Global Women's Strike for a care income. Because if we had our own money in our pockets and we were financially independent of the men that were abusing us, you know, we'd be able to say, I don't have to stay here. Me and my children can just up and leave. And I think that's a key issue to tackling keeping us safe, because we can't rely on the state to do it.
Can you also elaborate, because you said the operating procedures of cops, of the police are quite good in theory, yes, in the textbooks, but they don't work with them in reality on the field, right? They don't follow those procedures. What about the law, the text of the law? How did the laws evolve since the founding of your organization? I mean, is the law protecting women in theory, at least at the moment, or not?
Well, I don't think it is, because like Lisa said, you know, rape in marriage became a crime in 91, and yet here we are 30 years on, and the conviction rate is at its lowest, and nobody's being held accountable, and more people are reporting rape. I think after the Jimmy Savile revelations, which were back in, I think they were 9 years ago now, you know, the amount of you know, the reports went up a lot, you know, and a lot of that was historic, I know, but I think, you know, the police have done a very good public PR job of saying, you know, you contact us, we'll make it easier for you to report. You can report online. We'll always believe you. They spend a lot of money on making you think, okay, I can go to them and they'll keep me safe. Why aren't they spending that money on making sure that, I mean, a lot of the time women are told, you know, if they think they've been drugged, for example, they'll say, okay, well, there must be something in my blood. And the police will say it's too expensive to send off your blood for analysis, and it probably won't show anything anyway. Even if it does, it won't prove that you didn't consent. You just think, what laws are there in place to keep me safe from an attacker that you're going to implement to carry out your job properly? So, I mean, you do have in the civil court, you can get a non-molestation order, you can get a restraining order out. You still need to have proof. And with legal aid cuts, you know, it's a lot harder to get any kind of remedy now. But, you know, a lot of the time, a piece of paper won't stop a violent man if he really wants to come for you. As you know, we see in the number of women that are murdered. I know it's at least 2 women a week are murdered by violent partners or ex-partners. And we did a lot of research into that a couple of years ago. We looked a lot at all the cases that were coming up in the media, and we looked at the ones where the police have been involved prior to the woman being murdered. And in all of those cases where the woman had reported the violent man before, only one officer ever lost his job, and one 999 call handler got sacked. That was it. I mean, that tells you everything you need to know. The IOPC, as it's known now, the Independent Office of Police Conduct, the framework that it uses is set up so that hardly any officer is ever going to be found guilty of misconduct. And when they are, they just get things like words of advice, or they get something that's called a management action plan, which just means they're monitored for a couple of months, or they're told to do extra training. So that tells you that the laws that are in place in this country are protecting the police and not the victims.
In the next part,
from our point of view, the women who are seeking asylum suffer all the prejudices, all the discrimination that you've heard described, happening to other rape survivors. But of course, there's the additional and much more terrifying prospect of being detained and deported